Okay, welcome back to another episode of Loans Elevated. I have a very special, really awesome guest, Landin Arnett.
Hi.
Hey, what's up, man? So he came a few weeks ago and did a lunch and learn for us with realtors and really trying to get in the mind of an appraiser and crack some of this code so that we're all working on the same team, right? We're not working against each other, those types of things. Landon's been in business forever. I respect the heck out of him. We've known each other for quite a while. He's a real estate investor, so he has that in mind, but he's also an excellent appraiser. I don't know if you want to give a quick intro on how long you've been in the business, how long you've been doing this?
Yeah, sure. So you said forever, which compared to other appraisers, I'm new, considering the average age of appraisers in the U.S. is over 50. But I've been appraising here in the Utah area for about 6 years. And like you said, I'm also an investor. I'm married to a very high-producing, very successful agent. So I have a bit of that perspective as well when we talk about maybe some of the differences between appraisers and agents. Mm-hmm. I sit and work next to an agent all day long. So yeah, I think I have a broad understanding of that side and a very deep understanding of investing and appraising and values and things like that.
Awesome, cool. Well, thank you for coming.
Of course.
And really, yeah, in this market, only the last 6 years even matters.
That's
anyway,
true.
So
That's true. It's been a wild ride of 6 years. I got in at a very interesting time to start appraising, and it's been great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's dive in. So Landon and I went through a few bullet points to make sure that we hit this topic as comprehensively as possible, but not getting too far into the weeds. So let's start with our first bullet point, which is value. So what exactly is value, and how does that differ when you think value as an appraiser? How does that differ from maybe how a homeowner thinks about value and how a realtor, if they're listing a home, thinks about value? Like, maybe break that down a little bit.
Sure. So one thing I like to say and start when we talk about value is that value is not a truth that can be found. There is no exact value for something. It's all perspective. There's usually a range, and it's going to depend on a lot of different motivating factors. The value for a seller is obviously going to be different sometimes than the value for a buyer. And then the value from what I do has to be based on data and market statistics and analysis, whereas mostly I feel like buyers are buying a lot of times on emotion and impulse, especially when it's retail. Maybe it's a little bit different when it's an investment buyer. That maybe refers back to some of the data. But just because a buyer is willing to go above and beyond for a house that they love, that's near their family, that's next to a park that their kids love, that's a lot of emotional value.
And it could be influenced by fatigue because they're sick and tired of shopping and getting beat out. So that doesn't really say what the value of the home is.
Right. So the value they may place on the asset of the real estate is going to be different when I come and look at it, and I'm supposed to be looking at it unbiased, unemotional, some sort of like blank slate of non-emotion statistics and analysis, and I do my best to do that. Now I take into consideration the factors like it's next to a park or things like that. Obviously that helps, but when I look at value, I have to base my valuation on past sales data, which means that I am inherently reporting the past, and I am not predicting or thinking about the future, which again I think is a big divide when you think about how agents look at value. I know when my wife goes to list, because I'm her husband and she sits next to me all day, I think she pays a little bit more attention to what do the comps, the sold comps say. But then again, let's look at what's listed and see how do we compete with what's listed and maybe where we assume these are going to be closing by the time we're closing. So agents might be predicting the future a little bit. I have to report the past.
For sure.
And when I start choosing comparables, I can include listings as supporting data or supporting comparables, but I cannot base my value on listings because, as you guys know, listings can fall through. They can be listed for one thing, and I'll use when I put a listing on a report, I'll use what it's listed at. But it could be under contract for way more, it could be under contract for way less. So that data is reliable. Past sales data is reliable.
So one big question that I get, which is right on this topic, and I know we talked about it before and in the class, this might be a time when you want to give your big asterisks on how all this information should be taken. But a lot of realtors, and honestly, from my perspective, like if I'm looking at this, both arguments or I guess the realtor's argument makes sense, which is when they say, hey, I've got 10 offers that were submitted on this listing. We accepted one, but I've got all these people that are willing to pay X amount over list price. How do you not take that into consideration when valuing my home? So that's maybe the biggest question I get in this type of market. Let's speak to that. Okay. And that might get you into the conversation about some creative ways of helping support a higher value, like time value adjustments. And we're getting out of order here a little bit, but I think that would be a good kind of
So the asterisks he mentioned, something I mentioned in the lunch and learn, that basically everything I say, it must have a little asterisk next to it, and that reads Landon's opinions. Like I said at the beginning, value is an opinion, and when an appraiser is hired by a lender to give a value, all we're giving is an opinion. And if you hire 100 appraisers to appraise a single house, you're going to get 100 different opinions. And they're going to come out in a range, probably like a bell curve. If you ever looked at statistical,
Yeah, this is good. Explain that whole bell curve thing.
Yeah, so let's say everyone comes out, 100 different appraisers, blind, come appraise a house. And let's say you're going to have the outliers. Let's say the house appraises in the middle for $500,000. You're going to have outliers on either end, maybe 450 to 550, and it's going to be a bell curve if you tracked all those values, right? That's what I would call the expected value range. The closer you are to the center might be the more accurate, and more you get out to the edges, you're looking at different standard deviations and outliers and whatnot. So the opinion about the value is an opinion, and you're going to get a range depending on what appraiser you get.
There was one thing on that bell curve that you spoke to in the lunch and learn, which was influencing an appraiser's value is illegal. So, but the word I wanted to say is there is a little bit more play if you land within that range, not even if you're not at the top of the bell curve. You may be on the more aggressive side of the bell curve, but if it's within that range, you can kind of push an appraiser that way.
Yeah, so again, this is my opinion of how I look at, especially when I have a contract price in front of me, so it's a sales. So I have a target to hit. So it's different than going in for a refinance where I don't have a target and I'm just kind of giving you my best, my best idea.
Judgment, yeah.
So in my opinion, if we're looking at that range of what I would consider to be the typical standard range for a value, if the purchase price you're giving me is a little north of center, and then you hired another 100 appraisers to go appraise that same house with a purchase price in mind, that center of that bell graph is going to get shifted north.
It's probably going to be about the purchase price.
Yeah, it's gonna. If your purchase price is within that realm, the average for what an appraiser might get on that is going to shift a little bit because it's within the range. If it's within the range, in my opinion, it's a reasonable purchase price. Now, if you set your purchase price outside what I would consider to be the typical range, and I can't shift it that far without going way into the outliers, and I'm having to ignore a whole bunch of data that brings it back the other way, then I start coming in undervalued, right? And a lot of times, if I can't get it, I'll come right back to center. And
so it's going to come way undervalued.
It might come more undervalued because center is where I know I can be bulletproof in my report and the data I'm using and the reasoning. As I start skewing my data up to try to hit a purchase price, sometimes I have to start excluding or ignoring some other data, right? But again, in my opinion, if you're within a reasonable amount and you've got sales that bracket, and we'll get to what bracketing is, your high values and your low values, then that's a reasonable purchase price, in my opinion.
So one big takeaway here for realtors is don't get too extreme on the aggressive pricing side, because it could force you to be dramatically lower. So if you can kind of push the envelope but not get too far to the other side.
And that's difficult now when buyers come in and offer $20,000 and $30,000 over.
Right.
They're blowing out the top range of what maybe the typical value would be based on sold comps, but it's what it's required to get it under contract. So again, I understand the difference there.
Yeah.
And something you just said, I don't like coming in undervalued by like $3,000 or $4,000. That feels really petty and is a very small percentage difference on like a $500,000 home.
Right.
But if for some reason I can't reach it and I'm coming in like $5,000 undervalued, that's when I feel like, okay, I might have to come back center. They're gonna be angry either way. Usually when I come in undervalued, I know I'm getting a phone call or an email or something, and I can better defend my report here than I could here.
Right.
You know,
so if it's coming in on a 500,000 listing at 495, you're probably gonna get yourself. I mean, it depends, of course, on all the data, but you're more likely to push back down to 470 or 460, something like that, if it's already pushing the envelope.
Maybe not that low, but
okay.
Yeah. Again, I coming in under $5,000 is really hard for me to go back and say yes, it was only $495, not $500. I know exactly why.
Yeah.
So again, that's hard to defend sometimes, and again, it feels a little petty, especially when ranges and values are so wide.
And that's one, I guess, issue about appraisals is it is an opinion. So your personality plays into the way you do this. Their personalities play in to the way they develop this opinion. So one question I want to make sure that we hit it. When there's a bunch of offers that the seller did not accept, why don't those count as any influence on what the value should be in your opinion?
Okay, so yeah, usually I say to agents that your offers you didn't, or the number of offers you got, doesn't really matter to me personally. And to most of the appraisers I know and associate with, that's somewhat of a consistent sentiment that just because you got a ton of offers doesn't really play into, again, the data. You got to show me the comparables, you know.
Right, it kind of just goes back to the point of it has to be a sold comp to matter.
Exactly, I have to show the comparables justify the price. Just because you got 20 offers, that doesn't really matter. I really only care about the offer you're under contract with.
Right.
And I've been sent sometimes or been asked like, hey, I got 10 offers, can I send you the other 9 just to show you I got them? I'm like, I don't really need it. It's not gonna affect me anyway.
Right.
So, you know, like all I care about is what you are under contract for and whether the market supports it or not.
Yeah, because you're not gauging market temperature, you're not gauging any of that stuff. You're just simply taking a snapshot of a home's value based on historical data. So whatever's happening from an emotional market temperature standpoint is basically irrelevant.
I wouldn't say completely irrelevant.
Okay.
I mean, I'm in the market every day, so I understand the dynamics. I understand the temperature of the market.
Right.
And I understand now that most listings are getting bid up and are getting multiple offers, and so I know that going in.
Yeah.
You know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, if a contract came to me that was $40,000 or $50,000 over, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is
what
weird."
is going on?
And I might call the agent and be like, "Hey, well, what happened here? Like, this is really." I see that now, and I don't even blink an eye. I'm like, "Oh yeah, 40, 50, good for them." Or 10, 15. It's par for the course. Comes in way under this value, then I have to stop and think, "Oh, weird. What happened here?"
Right. So you are kind of paying attention.
I'm paying attention. Does it affect my valuation? Does it affect what the raw past sales data is going to be regardless? No, not really.
Right.
And I'm aware of the market.
Yeah, so you are aware of the market, which is actually really good. But that seems like the biggest point that we probably sound very basic. Hopefully that doesn't spoil this whole thing. But it's like nothing that hasn't actually closed really even matters. It's all historical data. And even when you include listings on your report, it's simply at the request generally of the lender or the agencies forcing that. But listings don't matter. Under contracts don't matter. None of that stuff matters till it's sold.
To me, it doesn't matter to me until it's sold. And a point you just touched on, the value I'm giving, I'm being hired by lenders. They are my clients. My job isn't to protect them in any way. It's not to protect the buyer in any way. Again, it's just for me to give my opinion. But that opinion is also within a framework that is given to me by lenders, which a lot of that starts with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the big, conglomerators of loans. When they buy loans, they look at the appraisals and they say, we want to see certain things on these appraisals. And so I'm being given that framework to give my opinion of value based on a certain structure and some rules and kind of a box to stay within.
Let's give some examples on, because I know there's some this can be an episode in and of itself, just these points. It would be very boring. So let's go into, there are certain guidelines on how far a sold comp could be from the subject property there's got to be certain gross adjustments, net adjustments, certain distances, certain, it's got to be within a certain amount of time sold, recent data. Let's touch on the high level points that are the most prominent and most important factors to consider.
Okay. Yeah, so within that framework that I'm given by lenders, there's an ideal of what they want to see. What lenders want to see are houses as close as possible to the subject, as similar as possible, and really, really low gross adjustments for differences, right? That's the ideal. The ideal is that I can find copycat houses that have
The ideal is you can find the next door neighbor that sold, it's the exact same floor plan it sold yesterday, and everything is the same. Right.
There's your value, right? That's not realistic. And so generally what I'm looking at when I'm starting to look for comparables, generally they want to see houses within a mile. So within one, circular mile around the subject, that's where I'm usually pulling comparables from.
And let's do a plug on the radius tool.
Yes, please use the rate. That's what I use when I go to the MLS. I go to a search, whether full search, quick search, and I use the radius tool. 1 mile from the subject. That's my very first action when I go to look for comps, is right there.
And from a lender's perspective on that radius tool, I think that's important, because if people use Google Maps, for example, and they're searching if it's within a mile, that's not the same as the radius tool, because it's 1 mile as the crow flies, not one driving mile.
Right. Yeah, it's like a linear mile.
Yep.
So that's one of the big items that they look for. Now again, I can use comps that are 2 and 3 miles away if I have to, especially for something that's on a lot of acreage or is highly unique, that requires to go out and find similar houses. If we're looking at a rambler in the middle of Salt Lake County, you should probably stay within a mile, because you throw a stone, you're gonna hit a rambler subdivision somewhere in Salt Lake County usually.
But if you're looking at a rambler on 5 acres in Salt Lake County, that's when you'll be spreading.
Exactly. So we're looking within a mile. I try to stay within a mile. When I was here doing the class, I talked about some of these silos or like these kind of bubbles I try not to pop. So distance, time, right now, I try to stay within the last 90 days. And sometimes I'll even go to like the last 30 to 60 days if there's a lot of sales to look at. I want the most recent data I can. And then anything outside, especially outside of 90 days, I'll be doing time adjustments. And then one of the other bubbles or silos I try to stay in is style. So if it's a rambler, I really only want to look at rambler sold comparables. If it's a 2-story, same thing. Townhome, condo to condo. I try to stay within those little bubbles. There's always exceptions, but one of the things that I end up talking to a lot with agents when they want to suggest comparables, or they're trying to have a reconsideration of value done on something I've done. Maybe they'll send me, here's all the 3-bed, 2-bath houses in the area. And they're ramblers, they're 2 stories, they're tri-levels, they're multi-levels, and I say, okay, well, we were a 3-bed, 2-bath rambler, and I'm gonna stick to rambler. So if you send me a 2-story on a rambler, appraisal, I'm immediately gonna say, I'm not using that one because my ramblers are better indicators of value for the market
than a 2-story or multi-level or whatever.
Yeah, or a house that's a basement, house. Like, no one wants to live in a basement. People typically prefer above grade square footage. So yeah, I try to stay with the similar allocation of above and below grade square footage when I'm using.
And is it true that it's more important to focus on above grade square footage than it is to worry about having similar below grade?
I would say yes. So typically, I took a poll when I was here about how many people would prefer to live, in 1,000 square feet above grade versus 1,000 square feet below grade. Everybody would prefer the above grade. So typically, above grade square footage, so first floors and above, are valued higher, especially on an appraisal, more than basement area. So some of the biggest indicators of value when I look at comparables are going to be GLA, so gross living area above ground, acreage, and then your location, which, if I'm pulling comps within a certain area, that kind of takes care of itself. But yes, I'm looking for houses that have a similar above grade square footage, and below grade if you can get it.
If you can get it. So just to recap, ideally you're within 1 mile. Right now you're within 30 to 90 days, but in normal markets it's no more than 1 year, or is it 6 months?
Correct, yeah. Usually if it's more than a year, then I have got some explaining to do about why I had to do that. Same with a lot of these other bubbles. As soon as I put something that's out further than a mile, if I don't have some commentary explaining, I'm going to get a request to get it. I need to explain why I've broken one of those sacred bubbles of the mile, you know, or why I've got a comparable that has a 25% or more gross adjustment, which is one of those frameworks they don't like to see comparables that are more than 25% gross adjustment, bigger or smaller than the subject. They're saying, why is this considered similar if there's so much adjustments going on?
And one thing that I think is important to explain, I think a lot of people know it, but not everybody knows what gross adjustments are. Gross adjustments, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, this is any adjustment on the report. So you've got to adjust up because the subject is bigger square footage than comp 1. But then you have to adjust down because it has fewer bedrooms and bathrooms and a smaller lot.
Yep.
But then you have to adjust back up because it has more garage bays. It's the cumulative of all those adjustments, whether they're negative or positive. So if it was 25,000 negative, 25,000 positive, that's 50,000 gross.
Correct.
Right? And then can you support higher gross adjustments if they net out to be lower, or still no?
That could be one of the reasonings. If I did have to have a comparable that had high gross adjustments, I could say, but it brings it back down within the range. I'd have to explain it. That could be one of the reasons I could help explain it. But yeah, typically
higher gross adjustments, you mean?
Yeah,
if it netted out to be more.
Yeah, that could help. But yes, you're right. That is how we calculate gross adjustments, and the other would be the net. And so yeah, a 25% gross adjustment is usually the limit, and it's going to hit a red flag, and I'm going to have to explain myself. So again, one of the scenarios I sometimes run into is, my house that I've listed here is $600,000. You should have no problem getting it because in the neighborhood there's a home that just sold for 1.2. And I say, okay, well, that 1.2 mansion, maybe it's not a mansion anymore.
that
$1.2 million home, you can't consider that comparable to the $600,000 home because to even adjust that to get it down to the range, you're looking at 50+% square gross adjustments to even get it in the same range. So just because a home in your neighborhood sold for $1 million doesn't mean everything else can appraise for whatever it wants. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and that's where it just goes back to some of the other details you have to bracket. It's got to be similar square footage, similar lot, not just the same neighborhood and recent.
Similar amenities.
Right, similar amenities. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's talk about adjustment.
I didn't hit on bracketing.
Let's definitely.
So one of those other ones, the main ones that I have to deal with is called bracketing, and this has to deal with selecting comparables that, let's start with square footage. Let's say my total size of my house is 2,000 square feet. I cannot use 6 different or however many comparables I use that are all 3,000 square feet and say these are similar. I've got to show some that are bigger. I've also got to show some that are smaller. So or equal, right? If I have one that's exactly equal, it's considered bracketed. So if I have a 2,000 square foot home, I'll usually try to find something that's a 1,800 square foot home, and then something that's a 2,300 square foot home, and adjust the 1,800 up, adjust the 2,300 down, kind of meet down in the middle.
At 2,000. So hang on, one question I've got, because I didn't hear this last time you were here. You're saying if you have a 2,000 square foot comp and you find or a subject property and you find a 2,000 square foot comp that's the same house, that is considered bracketed? You don't need to go bigger and smaller in that case?
No, because I've got something right on mind.
Got it. Okay.
So this comes into play a lot with GLA or above grade square footage, which we just talked about. I've got to get something bigger, something smaller, or something exactly on, which with townhomes and condos is usually easy because they're all the same. But this also has to do with age, like garage bay count. If my house is a two-car has a 2-car garage, I have to have something on there that's also a 2-car garage, or something that's a 1 and a 3. Right, so you have an equal or something above and below to then bring adjustments kind of back towards.
That's essentially to back up your adjustments. You're showing that this sales price was a little less, and the reason is it had a 1-car garage. This one is a little more, it had a 2-car garage. So the difference is how much I can credit this home for on the 1-car, or the subject with the 2-car. I can give them a credit compared to the 1-car comp, and I can hit them. And you have to somehow quantify the value of that garage. That's what.
Yeah, and doing this practice you just talked about is what appraisers refer to as paired sales analysis. We're looking at paired sales right next to each other, and we're making positive and negative adjustments for superior or inferior amenities or features, and trying to bring that analysis somewhere where it's cohesive and makes sense. Right. So, and this also comes into play heavily with sales price. So again, if we're talking about that kind of range of sales, if I'm going to appraise a home for $500,000, I have to have sold sales that are similar, that have sold for more than $500,000, or at least equal to, and some that are less. I cannot appraise a home for more than the highest sold comp I have on the report. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky sometimes when a home is now gone under contract for $20,000 and $30,000 more.
Right.
If I look at the similar homes that have sold, not what's under contract, the ones that sold last month and the month before, are selling for 500, and the highest comp I can, the highest sale I can see that's similar is maybe 510, but you're under contract for 525. Unless I can find another similar home that isn't breaking all of my bubbles and all my silos that sold for more than 525, I literally cannot appraise you for that much. I can only appraise you for equal to or less than the highest sold comparable value.
So that one would theoretically come in at 510.
Right.
And this is especially,
yeah.
That's the highest it could come in.
Right.
And this is especially important with condos and townhouses because it's the same unit selling within the development.
Yeah.
Or even single family homes where you've got a certain neighborhood that's selling for maybe, or a lower price, but you have another neighborhood next door that for some reason is selling for a higher price.
Yeah.
It's going to be, how can you argue that on townhomes, condos, or maybe even a single family development with very similar homes? How do you pull the comp from the other neighborhood that's selling for more when the one, the comps in the subject neighborhood had not sold for that much?
Well, there are location adjustments, which I can do, which I can look at and say, okay, maybe the average median price of this neighborhood is $30,000 more than a similar sized home in this neighborhood, and I can make a location adjustment.
Got it.
Saying
Okay.
This subdivision is worth more. But yes, you're right. When it comes to appraising condos and townhomes, it's really hard as appraisers to appraise something that is going to go down as the highest sold condo ever in a subdivision, because I have to appraise you at equal or less than what I can show has been the highest sale.
Right.
So it's really hard. It's a lot easier in single family homes to find something that's bigger or something that has maybe a better amenity that's sold for higher, and then adjust it back down and be able to increase the upper end of appraisability. It's a lot harder in condos and townhomes when they're all cookie cutter, and one sold yesterday for $210 and you're under contract for $215, and it's only $5,000, but maybe I can't make it because there's literally not another comparable that sold for $215 or over. I'm gonna have to say you're only worth $210, and they'll say, well, that was 2 months ago, and I'm like,
that's just
even if I make a time adjustment to bring you up, I still don't have a high sold comp that can bracket my appraised value in that scenario.
So say it was 2 months ago and it was a $5,000 delta like you're saying now. Could you time adjust to say this one's worth $212 because of time adjustments and not $210, which was the highest sold comp? Is that possible?
Again, it's something that I could argue as my opinion and explain as best I could.
But there's still
it's
a
going
chance
to come down to an
could-
underwriter that may send it back and say, show me a sale higher than your appraised value,
Got
or
it.
change it.
Got it. Okay. So one important thing, I think, a big takeaway, and don't hate us lenders either, but
It's all their fault. It's them.
a big takeaway is if he gets too aggressive on breaking these bubbles or getting out of these silos, the underwriters for the bank could simply just come back and say, nope, that doesn't work. Either show me something that is not requiring you to break these bubbles that still supports value, or drop your value.
Yeah.
So
Revise or change it.
yeah, that's interesting.